What's up everybody, my name is John Tyler and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing my favorite crankbait of all time and giving y'all a little bit of details on exactly how I like to fish it and what kind of gear I like to throw it with. Before we get started with the video, make sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, turn on post notifications, and if you have a comment or question about the video or anything in general, make sure to drop it in the comment section below. I'm also going to be linking my art portfolio website in the description below, so make sure to check that out if you've got the time. But without further delay, let's get right into the video. Alright guys, so this right here is my favorite crankbait of all time. This is the Spro Rock Crawler 50. I'm going to give you guys some closer up shots here in just a second. But the Spro Rock Crawler 50 is a 2-inch long version of the traditional Rock Crawler 55, which I believe is more popular, more widespread. This effectively is kind of a finessier version of the 55, the one that you see people throwing most of the time. For a little bit of a size comparison, we've got the 55 here in my left hand and the 50 here in my right hand. There's a pretty substantial weight and size difference. While the 55 is not much longer than the 50, the overall girth is quite substantial and the length of the bill is fairly noticeable in terms of difference. So like I said previously, this bait comes in at 2 inches in length, weighs 5/16 of an ounce, and will dive anywhere from 4 to 8 feet contingent upon what kind of line you're going to use. And this right here, I'm pretty picky when it comes to this color. I can't really catch fish on anything but this color, believe it or not. This is Ozark Craw. Absolutely love this color. I'm going to give you guys some close-ups of this bait here shortly. As you can see, it is totally chewed up. Something about this color, a little bit of chartreuse, a little bit of green pumpkin, a little bit of unrealistic with realistic, really gets the fish going, and man, have I caught some fish on this color and this bait. So why do I think this bait is so successful for me, and why do I like to throw it? You know, I fish a lot of waters that receive a lot of cranking pressure from some super traditional, well-known baits, such as, like I showed previously, the 55 size rock crawler, whether that be the deep diver that goes 14 to 16 or the shallow diver that goes anywhere from 4 to 8. That is kind of a square bill replacement. Or things like the Strike King square bill, Strike King deep divers, DT16s, and of course the old Wiggle Wart, which I'm a firm believer that this rock crawler is kind of a modified and improved upon version of the rock crawler that was so popular for so long and still is in some circles today. So I'm always trying to get an edge on the anglers around me. I want to throw something that the fish don't see as much, something that I haven't heard a lot word of mouth wise, that I still think can get bit. I think kind of gives me an advantage over some other anglers throwing your larger baits, your more common popular baits that fish have seen go over their heads, you know, a couple quadrillion times. I'm going to try to include some photographs of quality fish that I've caught on the 50 size. I just think the smaller size, the more subtle wiggle and grind in the bottom is what really draws the fish in. Fish that see super aggressive and significantly larger crankbaits over and over again don't want to bite those things anymore. So if you go down to that little bit smaller a bait, they're going to be more interested. And then something about that color, man, I'm a big subscriber of chartreuse. If you guys know kind of how I like to fish, like I like to throw a chartreuse Ned rig head with a green pumpkin plastic. I try to add a little bit of pink to some of my jigs. I just like to have that little pop of color. I'm a firm believer that a little bit of vibrance will really cue in a couple extra bites as opposed to going totally natural all the time. And I'm throwing this Ozark Craw color in clear water, dirty water, you know, and then kind of that mid-stained water. So how do I like to fish the Rock Crawler 50? You know, it's a pretty light bait. It's got great hooks on it, but it actually casts pretty good given the fact that it's only 5/16 of an ounce. So you can throw it on a medium bait caster. That's what I generally do. You can roll cast it, although, you know, generally you're going to be making an over-the-shoulder cast with a crankbait because you're trying to cover water. But oftentimes I do find myself casting this bait to targets because if you kind of worm it through the cover, you won't get stuck too bad. So you can roll cast this bait with relative ease given that you have the proper equipment. For example, I like to throw this bait on a 6/8 medium Bass X rod with a lot of tip, and it's got a lot of give, which allows me to load that bait up and put it where it needs to be. And also, when I'm making the long bomb crankbait casts that are a little more traditional, I can very easily do that. I'm kind of a shorter guy at 5'9". I don't need a giant rod to throw my baits on, so I try to stick with a smaller rod, but sometimes that can limit your ability to make roll casts. But this Bass X 6/8 medium has been killer for my lighter crankbaits, my lighter topwaters, and is what I throw my Rock Crawler 50 on 95% of the time. However, I did just get back from Canada and I only take one bait casting rod up there and 2 spinning rods because there's a lot of finesse fish and a lot of finesse applications, and let's be honest, I kind of just want to fight the fish on a spinning rod. So I was throwing my Rock Crawler 50 on a medium action 7'1" Phoenix spinning rod. And I was having a lot of success with it. You know, super sensitive, it's a medium action spinning rod, very similar action to a medium action bait caster. However, there are a little bit of differences in stiffness and power. Obviously your bait caster is gonna be a little bit stronger than the spinning rod, but I found myself being able to load into those fish very easily without losing them. I did, however, change my hooks to the Gamakatsu G Finesse hooks when I decided to put the crankbait on the spinning rod. Just a little bit of a lighter action rod, I think warranted a little bit of lighter action hooks, and I found relative success with that. So I would recommend giving that a shot if you decide to throw this on spinning gear. When throwing this on bait casting equipment, like I said, is what I do around here in Kentucky 95% of the time. I'm gonna be throwing it on 10-pound monofilament. It's a light bait that I wanna get down to close to the maximum depth, because I'm gonna tell you here in a second how I like to fish it, and the line diameter and line pound test is super critical to that. So 10-pound monofilament. And if I'm throwing it on spinning gear, which I don't do very often, but I did find an application for it in Canada, I'm going to be throwing it on 10-pound braid to an 8 or 6-pound leader. And with that 8-pound, I noticed a pretty big difference on how deep that bait got. I would feel comfortable in saying I got it beyond the specifications of 4 to 8 feet, that in fact it got probably down closer to 10 feet on a really long cast. So why do I like to throw it on light monofilament line? So the general narrative today in the fishing world is that you gotta throw your crankbaits on fluorocarbon, which is a sinking line. I prefer monofilament because it's cheaper. When you're fishing a fast moving bait, they're not gonna see the line, so the invisibility advantage of fluorocarbon is kind of negated. And with monofilament, if you get your bait stuck in a log or a rock or just somewhere on the bottom, it's more likely to float up with that buoyant floating monofilament line as opposed to if you were throwing fluorocarbon. I like to throw the 10-pound monofilament because this is a small bait, you don't need heavy line, and by throwing anything heavier than 10, you're kind of negating the depths that which this bait can achieve. I want this bait to, with ease, get to its maximum depth of about 8 feet, because the retrieve that I like to use with this bait is to make a long cast or cast to cover, either or. Generally I'm fishing it around your traditional crank spots like rip wrap and peat gravel, but like I said, this can kind of act as a square bill replacement, so you can fish it around cover. It's not as weedless as a square bill, but if you fish it intelligently and with a lot of intermittent pauses and allowing it to float up out of the cover, you won't get hung up too much. But what I like to do is I make that cast, whether it be a roll cast to cover or a long cast to cover a stretch of bank, and then really engage my reel quickly. Get that bait down to the bottom as quickly as possible so it's making contact. It is called a rock crawler, so you want it crawling across the rocks. You don't want it suspended above anything. So make sure it's getting down in there, digging in those rocks, and I generally do a pretty quick retrieve all times of the year. I'm throwing it on a 7.5-to-1 Daiwa bait casting reel, and I'm reeling it back pretty steadily with some intermittent pauses to attract that reaction strike from a pause and then an immediate start. I believe a lot of times I get bit after a pause and then a return to the normal speed, so going a long stop, kill it, and then get back to it. I really think that can draw some reaction strikes. If I'm in shallower water or somewhere where I think I'm gonna get hung up a lot quicker, I'll do a kind of a pull and pause retrieve where I'm gonna throw it down the stretch of bank, get it down to the bottom, which generally, like I said, is gonna be in shallow water. Make sure it's in the rocks and pull it across the bottom, feeling every single rock. You know your bait's doing its thing. And then when you either feel a snag or you think you're about to get snagged, you kill it, allow the bait to float up a foot or two, and then re-engage. So that allows the bait to float up out of the cover to keep it from getting snagged, and then dive right back down. And that also can cause some reaction strikes. When fishing it on the spinning reel, which was a Daiwa Tatula 6.4-to-1, I believe, which is a pretty quick spin reel, all things considered, I'm still fishing this bait super fast, especially in warm weather months. I'm working this thing quickly. I want reaction strikes. These are aggressive fish. But even when I catch fish on it in the winter and spring when the water temperature is a little bit cooler, I'm still moving this thing along the bottom. I want it making all kinds of commotion. It's not a huge bait. It doesn't have a lot of draw power, so you do want it making enough noise so that it does draw the fish in. Vary the retrieve a little bit to kind of make yourself stand out from other fishermen who are simply casting it out there and winding it back as quick as they can, or oftentimes as slow as they can, which in my experience is less effective. So I'm oftentimes fishing this bait in like super traditional cover and bank, cover and rip wrap, chunk rock. But also I want you to kind of think of this as a square bill replacement or just an ulterior or another version of a square bill, because you can fish this around cover like I mentioned and it will get bit. However, I find most success fishing it traditional, making parallel casts to the bank, keeping it tight to the bank, counting the rocks, but quickly engaging your reel, reeling it quickly across the bottom. That's really gonna give your bait the most erratic action. And that's where I personally caught my biggest fish and had the most success with the Rock Crawler 50. All right guys, so that's gonna do it for today's video. I hope you guys have an excellent day and thank you so much for checking out this video. As always, thank y'all so much for watching and I'll see y'all in the next one.